is age, amongst some other things. So this really kind of changes the worldview of imaging, and it changes the worldview of therapeutics if, in fact, these disease-modifying agents, which look promising at this point, actually turn out to be true and real. And so nuclear medicine is going to be front and center in having a very responsible role in helping to identify, using these powerful tools, those patients who or persons who might benefit from these treatments and therapies. That's kind of a long-winded answer to your question, but what I try to do is give you a sense of what the waterfront is like right now. And while we're not at the promised land yet, there are some really interesting trends that suggest that even in the next 3 to 4 years, that the world will change as dramatically as it has in the last 2 or 3 years.
Right, and I assume in a whole lot of other ways too. For example, even if a therapy works partially well, even slowing down a disease, it's going to be important that we do the imaging so that we can. That therapy is going to be expensive, so you need to be able to identify exactly who needs it, and more importantly, who doesn't need it, or might be harmed by it if it gets the wrong person. Yeah. And also, there's going to be other therapies. If one works, then there's going to be copies. There's going to be ways, other avenues that are going to hit it. So it's going to be a very much increase in research that's going to depend on these new amyloid traces. And there's another amyloid traces, and there's tau as well. Could you tell us a little bit about some of these other new things that are on the horizon?
Sure. Let me just comment on a couple points that you made, because I think they're really important, and that is, if there is an antibody therapy or other anti-amyloid treatment, the likelihood is that these treatments are going to be very expensive. And so while we're at a point now, at least in the U.S., where it is difficult to get insurance company approval to do the scans, were a patient to be enrolled or treated with an approved anti-amyloid treatment, I can tell you that the insurance companies would demand a scan and would pay for it happily, because of this notion that 20 to 25% of patients are going to be not have amyloid burden in their brain, and so the scan is expensive, but it's a lot cheaper than a treatment. So I think that's important. In terms of new things that are happening, yes, you meant there are new amyloid tracers that are being developed. We have 3 F-18 amyloid tracers that are advanced and or approved and are very good. One of the ways that they might be improved is to decrease some of the non-specific signal in the brain, and specifically that signal that's taken up by the white matter. And it may make in some cases, scan interpretation more difficult, and certainly quantification of the scan can be compromised by contamination of white matter counts into the regions that you're assessing for the presence or absence of amyloid based on the imaging measures. So there are some new kind of next generation agents. One is called NAV4694. It doesn't have a proper name yet because it's relatively new. And what it potentially offers is a cleaner signal, in the sense that there's less white matter contamination, and it looks more like sort of the classic tracer for amyloid deposition in the brain, which is called carbon-11 PIB or C11 PIB. So it's an F-18 tracer that performs more like PIB, which the researchers in Alzheimer's disease really like and prefer. And that agent is licensed by a company called NVIDIA Biopharmaceuticals, based in Ohio in the U.S., and they are in phase 2 trials with that now, so as a diagnostic. So that may be an interesting new way to interrogate amyloid burden. And how much difference does it make relative to the current generation? I don't know. It offers some potential advantages, and we'll see how that pans out. From the perspective of other targets that are relevant in in Alzheimer's, tau is a very interesting target, because it's one of 2 of the original pathologic changes which were described by Alois Alzheimer in 1906 in his monograph on Alzheimer's disease, where he described the pathology of plaques composed of A-beta. He didn't know it was A-beta at the time. He was just describing what he saw under the microscope. And also neurofibrillary tangles, which are intracellular inclusions. And tangles are composed of a protein called tau. So up to this point, from an imaging perspective, we could image amyloid, but we couldn't image tau. And tau may be relevant in other ways to measuring potentially the progression of the disease. more accurately than perhaps we can do with amyloid. And the reason I say that is because tau seems to, at least in some preliminary studies with the tau imaging agents, seems to be a better marker of change over time and to correlate with clinical symptoms, clinical rating scales, whereas amyloid fills up early in the brain. It's a very sensitive early marker, but it doesn't change very much over the course of the illness, and its correlation with clinical cognitive measures is not so good. So this offers a new opportunity. There are a number of agents, there are like 3 or 4 pretty decent agents that are in validation phase right now. And we'll see over the next year or two and have a better sense of what their role will be in research and certainly in clinical care. And I don't know the answer to that now, but I think my guess is that they may be better progression markers than amyloid, and we'll have to see if that's the case.
I presume these tau agents are going to be more effective when we're dealing with anti-tau therapies rather than anti-amyloid, so they'll be useful in that respect. Yeah.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, there are anti-tau therapies, a few of them. There's a phase 3 trial currently going on that I'm aware of, focused on tau, where the imaging biomarker is FDG, because these tau agents weren't available. Now, were those agents available at the time the trial was started, they would have been incorporated into the trial. So it gives us sort of an extra thing to look at. I think the tau therapies are still not as prevalent as the amyloid therapies, and the world sort of is bimodal in the sense that there are amyloidists and Taoists, not Taoists, but Taoists, who believe that tau may be as relevant or as important or even more important in the pathophysiology, and the answer is we don't know. But what we do know is that tau accumulates in different areas of the brain compared to amyloid. And those areas that tau accumulates in are pretty relevant to regions of the brain that subserve memory functions, in particular the mesial temporal lobes, hippocampal formation, and that tau progression is progressive, and you can demonstrate those changes, at least in the cross-sectional studies that have been done currently with these agents.
I suppose my analogous to this might be a bit like heart disease, in that the anti-amyloid agents are a bit like anti-cholesterol agents, and the tau's a bit like inflammation. So it's a little bit like that. I mean, and most diseases aren't really one factor. I mean, heart disease isn't one just cholesterol. Right. It's also related to inflammation, I guess. Alzheimer's disease, I think, seems to be a very uniform disease, unlike oncology, in that it occurs right across the world in a fairly uniform basis. So it may be more amenable to therapy along those lines, because it seems to. But on the other hand, the pathology may not be a single thing. It may be a number of things that are happening.
Right. And I think the human brain is very complex, obviously, and so there's a lot of ways for things to go wrong, and we really don't understand the relationship between clinical onset and the development of these proteinopathies and their progression over time in these patients. And I think that's something that imaging will actually help to uncover, because imaging, after all, is basically non-invasive pathology, in the sense that we can see changes in living human brain over time and get a better sense of how these things change and get some clues as to how we might intervene with potential therapeutics.
So I was asked this question, you were asked this same question last night, and in 5 years' time, are we going to have a therapy of any sort? And in 10 years' time, how good's that therapy going to be?
Oh, so you asked me to look into the crystal ball, and of course, prognostication is in medicine is a very dangerous thing at best.
Guaranteed to be wrong.
You're guaranteed to be wrong. So, so understanding that there's no risk, no gain, I'll suggest that we will have disease-modifying therapies in 5 years. I don't know that they will be terribly effective, but compared to what exists now, if you get a 30% reduction in the rate of progression, that's actually a huge change. If those studies from the studies being done now kind of pan out in these larger trials, that's a pretty good start. And if you look at it from a health economics perspective, a 30% slowing in the rate of symptomatic change in Alzheimer's patients can really correspond to things like delay to nursing home care, higher quality of life, and in a disease like Alzheimer's disease, which is progressive, having a little bit of nickel and diming therapies compared to the current symptomatic therapies actually offers a great advance. In 10 years, maybe we'll get smarter and we'll understand some of these interactions between tau and amyloid and how we might have make better use of the therapies, and perhaps in combination. Perhaps we'll have better screening algorithms. Perhaps you'll go to the shopping mall, have a quick test of either cognitive function or some soft biomarker to kind of enrich the population, then get referred for a scan, and if your scan is positive, then you get treated like now. For example, when you reach age 50 in the U.S., you have a colonoscopy to look for screening, and those are expensive screening tools, but the downside of missing something is pretty high, and certainly that's true for Alzheimer's disease as well.
Well, thank you very much for taking part in the podcast. I think it's been really interesting. It's amazing how things can progress so quickly in 18 months. We're doing a lot of research here in Melbourne, and so if you're interested in being a volunteer, go to brainpet.org. I just mentioned that because we're certainly recruiting for a wide range of all of the studies. Basically, all of the studies that you're involved in, we're pretty much involved in Melbourne, and a few others as well. So so it's great to see such powerful research being done and things going forward. And we really appreciate that.
Yeah, and I would also offer my congratulations, because Melbourne is a real bright spot in the world of clinical research in Alzheimer's disease. When I come to Melbourne, I know that this is a great center of excellence, and I would encourage anyone who is interested in watching this podcast to participate in research, because after all, every medicine that's on your cabinet in your medicine shelf was at one time a research study. And that is a gift that has been given to you by someone who was in a position to volunteer to participate in research. And we need to kind of pay that gift forward. And that's why I'm a very strong advocate of encouraging people to participate in these trials, even if they don't have the disease, even if they're healthy control. I mean, it's really important. This is what advances the field. And as a clinical researcher, we can't do anything without participation of folks to do this. So thank you very much. I appreciate the time to chat and to visit the center here in Melbourne.
Thank you.